Taylor Johnson, my friend, welcome.
Awesome. Yeah. Good to see you, man. So happy to be here with you. It's been
It's
a
great to
while.
see you. Great to see you. It's been way too long. So
Yeah.
good to have this virtual meeting. You are on the Super Connector podcast. What we're going to do is we're going to weave together some interesting subjects, basically your areas of expertise, and also just whatever comes up, whatever we feel like we need to engage with in this moment. So
Awesome.
To get us started, just give us a little bit of a bio. Who are you? What do you like to do? What are you doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Awesome. So my short bio, professionally, what I'm doing right now, and also in my passion, is I am a sex coach and educator for men, and I help men build their sexual energy so they can create the sexual and intimate life that they want, so they can create the entire life that they want. And I'm here to share with the world that there's so much more to sex that we haven't been taught, through our parents or our society. And when we actually start to really examine what's there, there's so much more pleasure. There's multiple non-ejaculatory orgasms. There's like heartgasms. There's deep soul connection with people. And yeah, there's a lot of magic in that realm. And so I have programs and coaching all around that. And it's super fun. It's a lot of fun to get on Zoom calls with 60 other guys from around the world and talk vulnerably about sex and our desires and our fears and rewire all of our programs, And personally, I'm a mountain biker. I'm a musician. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I play handpan. I play all kinds of drums. And yeah, I get on slacklines occasionally too.
It's important to have balance.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
That's awesome. So basically you're here to save the world is what you're saying.
Save the world one orgasm at a time.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing is incredibly important work. So the more I hear about it, the more I'm pleased to hear that you're doing it, that somebody's doing it, and that it's you. Because I actually remember the seed of this manifestation of yours in college in a conversation that we had.
Really?
Yeah. I remember you just telling me, like, you were just like, yeah, I really want to learn everything about sex and like really be good at it, like master my sexual experience. And I was just like, cool, like I've never really heard anybody say that before. And I remember that specific moment, so it's cool to see like you've really brought it to life.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey for sure.
Yeah.
But worth it. Man, that's so cool you remember that conversation, because I definitely don't, but it sounds like something I would have said at that point in my life. For sure.
Yeah, it is funny because it's like so many things happen in college, and it's like so much of them probably are just kind of gone forever because it's just like this buffet of sensory experience that's really like it's constant, like after you leave you realize like life isn't always like that necessarily. No. Although I have been endeavoring to make it so in my own way, and I've done a really good job of that, I would say.
Which is impressive considering you now have a child.
Well, she's so fun and awesome. I mean, it's like she brings a lot of she brings some intensity and some some emotional challenges and a lot of responsibilities that I didn't have before, but also it's like she brings so much joy into our lives every day. So
that's beautiful.
It really is. Yeah. Super thankful. Super blessed. So I know a little bit about how that journey went for you, but I don't know the whole story. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more context of how you came to be doing this.
Yeah. Wondering if I should start from college. Medium story short, long story, medium short. I've always been really interested in things like yoga and meditation and energy and magic and this sort of stuff from when I was a teenager, and I remember in high school, I did a lot of landscaping work, and I traded with a retreat center to do landscaping in trade for a silent retreat. And I remember it was the first time I ever heard Eckhart Tolle speak, the power of now type stuff. And I remember, whoa, like mind blown sort of things, And at the same time, I was also really interested in sex. And there was no crossover between these two worlds at all. Like going forward, I did a few different yoga teacher trainings. I taught yoga at a few different places. I went on different mindfulness meditation retreats, different specific styles of Buddhist meditation retreats, different energetic practices I studied. And in none of those things did they ever talk about sex. And here was this other part of my life that felt really important and beautiful and powerful. Sex is this incredible thing that you can share with yourself or other people. And I would have these, these experiences of deep connection, and also a lot of anxiety and problems as well. But I would have these little glimmers of magic that would happen in the sexual experience that would seem like they would in some way relate to the yoga and the meditation. But, literally there was no crossover. And anytime I tried to bring up a question like that in any of these places, it was sort of like hushed or shunned. You're like, oh, we don't talk about sex at the meditation retreat, or, oh, we can't talk about that at the yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
And so fast forward a little bit more, I remember after college, I ended up getting pretty addicted to porn and watching porn regularly, like every day sort of thing, masturbating to porn. And I got into a relationship with a beautiful, awesome woman. And my experiences with porn really challenged our relationship. But I didn't know that at the time. But, retrospectively, I can see that porn really negatively impacted our relationship, and it impacted my sexual abilities, my expectations, what I thought was possible, how I showed up in the sexual experience. And I ended up suffering for a long time with all kinds of like premature ejaculation problems, erectile dysfunction, sexual anxiety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of a crippling time in my life because, as much as like we like to think that our sexuality is isolated in this little box in our genitals, the truth is that our whole body and our brain, like we're a sexual being, and our sex life impacts our entire life, So I wasn't walking as tall when I went into the grocery store. My shoulders weren't back. I had this sort of vibe, if you want to call it that, of lack of confidence, And so fast forward a little bit more, I started researching this stuff, and I found a couple articles saying that, hey, maybe if you're experiencing these problems in your relationship, try not watching porn and see what happens. So I started to experiment with that, and I noticed that the less I watched porn, the better my relationship became. And the less I watched porn, the less I struggled with things like erectile dysfunction too. But premature ejaculation was still a thing. So I read a lot of books, and then I ended up traveling all over the world, taking different tantric workshops and retreats, trying to really figure this stuff out and deepen into my experience of sex. And throughout that process, there was a link that was made between sexuality and spirituality that was beautiful for me. I still remember the moment that it happened. It was the first time I ever felt deeply connected to spirit and sexually aroused at the same time. And I thought, holy wow, like this is what people are talking about, this is what all those yogis and all the Taoist texts are talking about. Like it's this right here. And through these practices, I started to experience amazing sexual experiences that went on for hours, and I didn't struggle with premature ejaculation anymore. And then like my entire sex life and my entire life transformed. I started making more money in my business, and I was more confident. And eventually I realized literally all the books on my bookshelf were about sex or intimacy or relationship. None of them had to do with what my current business was at the time, which was a professional photographer and filmmaker in the business world. And so I decided, hey, maybe I should pursue this. Maybe I should start talking about this more than just at parties and literally all my friends that I talk to, but maybe there's some other people in the world. And my friends said to me, like, Taylor, probably there's some other people in the world who would love to talk about this. Like, have you considered, sharing about this publicly? And then that's, here we are from that. Long story.
That's so great. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. So truly following your passion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I said, I think it's like, I really think this is incredibly important. It's like, it's like this elephant in the room that we're not addressing, and
Yeah.
we have so much. We have simultaneously like a very sexual society and also a very sexually repressed society.
Mm-hmm.
I think also in our, from an early age, we're essentially given this picture of like secrecy and shame and guilt that's connected to sex.
Yeah.
Right. So can you give us a little bit more about that, or perhaps how you think about moving through that for people?
Specifically shame and guilt around sex and the messages we get from society.
Yeah, secrecy.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge, that's a great question. I want to acknowledge our society is not one that encourages and fosters a healthy sexuality, in my opinion.
Not even close.
We get bombarded with messages about sex constantly in advertising, in movies and TV shows, and yeah, literally everywhere, and not very many of those messages are positive. I'd wager that maybe like 1% of those messages are actually positive, healthy messages about sex. So, and then you bring in the whole concept of porn, easily accessible porn, and then you just have a recipe for disaster, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember growing up, I received the programming specifically that I was lucky enough to get the messages that sex was a beautiful thing, but I also got the messages that, it's only to be between a man and woman who are deeply in love and only to happen behind closed doors, and nobody should know about it, and you should never talk about it, and you shouldn't make noise, and it should be this secretive thing, and I lived with that for a long, long time. And, for me, that manifested in a few different ways, but one of the ways it manifested was like a severe fear of making noise and expressing myself during sex. And I know this is something a lot of guys experience, but for me, I would have sex with my girlfriends, and sometimes they would not even know if I was enjoying it, because I'd be doing the physical motions, but like I wasn't making any type noises, and like the only time they would really see me in pleasure is at the moment of ejaculatory orgasm. And they'd be like, "Oh, he's alive." Oh, he must like this, and so, gosh, I just want to normalize that almost all of us living in society today have been impacted negatively in some way through society's messages about sex. And it's normal if you're listening to this and you feel that way. If you feel any way, shameful about sex or shameful about your desires or anything like that, it's normal, and you're definitely not alone. And one of the biggest ways we can start to shift that is by having real, authentic conversations about it with other people, just talking about it openly, and you have to, of course, be discerning with how you talk about this. Don't just say to the cashier at the grocery store, "God, I was thinking about this anal butt plug, getting one of these the other day. What do you think about that?" But
unless you're in the sex store.
Yes, if you're in the sex store, fair game, for sure. But you know what I mean? Like there's such secrecy and such shame around this. And it's really so powerful to just talk with somebody that you trust about it. Just talk about sex, share your desires, share your fears. And then you'll see really quickly, if you initiate that conversation, pretty much everybody else has some fear or shame or unspoken desire about sex. And then it's like, wow, what a relief, what a relief.
Yeah, it's such a weird sort of blockage to have. I mean, I've had entire relationships with, sexual relationships with people where we hardly talked about sex at all.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to admit that, in a sense, because I didn't even know what I didn't know at the time. But I think so many people have that experience where it's like this thing they don't even talk to their partners about, which is totally crazy.
Yeah. But what models do we have to go on? Like who else have we seen that openly talks with their partners about sex? Like, I don't know. It doesn't happen in porn. I didn't see it with my parents. Yeah, maybe you did, but
Right. No, we didn't talk about that much at all.
yeah.
Very, very little. I think, the great imprint that my parents gave me was simply to love and respect each other, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm super thankful for that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So in terms of of beginning to open that up, do you have any recommendations about even how to start talking more with your partner or with other people about sex?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to acknowledge that the thought of even having a conversation like this could be terrifying for some people, or you could feel frozen or go into paralysis. And if that's the case, maybe that's not the best place to try to initiate a conversation with your partner from. And maybe something that could be helpful for you is to go to, there's so many different online groups out there or articles that talk about sex, and maybe you could start reading some content that is sex positive. Here's a book recommendation. There's a book called Tell Me What You Want. It's this researcher who looked at thousands of people's sexual fantasies in the context of relationship. So there's sexual fantasies within relationship with their partner. And then he looked at specifically what percentages of these people actually acted out their fantasies with their partner. And of those people, what were the effects of acting out those fantasies with their partner on their relationship? And, spoiler alert, I'll just tell you, turns out communicating and acting on a fantasy within your relationship almost always improves things, if it's done with intention. And you get various return on investment, if you even want to use those words in the context of sex, depending on the type of fantasy that you do. But the book is it's awesome at normalizing the fact that 99% of people regularly have sexual fantasies, and it's a great thing to talk about it, and it gives some tools to do that. And that could be a great first step. Also, I have some articles about this on my website too, but I like that book a lot because it talks about everything from light bondage and spanking to threesomes and orgies and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. So it could even be helpful for kind of going through a menu of sorts of here are some sexual possibilities in terms of new things to try. I think for a lot of people, even knowing where or how to look at that information can be a pretty big block.
Totally. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is there is a lot of information out there, and it can be really helpful just to start thinking about this in a different way and looking at some of the stuff that's out there to get the gears turning. And if you don't really resonate with one thing, find another article, find another video, and certainly you will find some that help inspire you, that give you some ideas around sex and potentially how to talk with your partner about it. But specifically, once you get to that point of wanting to talk to your partner about sex, I find that it's really helpful to frame the conversation before you go into the conversation. So not while you're sitting at the breakfast table saying baby, I want to talk about sex last night. When you did that thing, I didn't like it so much. I want to do this other thing. Not a good strategy. Not a good strategy. What would be more effective is at that same breakfast table, you could say to your partner, hey baby, or whatever you call them, I notice that I really would like to have an intentional conversation with you about sex, or I'd like to talk with you about our sex life. Is this a conversation that you're interested in having with me? Would you like to have that conversation? And that right there, it gives an opportunity for collaboration, it gives an opportunity for your partner to say yes. And then if they say yes, then you can say, okay, when would you like to have that conversation? We could talk about it now, or maybe we could talk about it later tonight or tomorrow, or setting some time. And doing so can create a feeling of safety because it can feel like an edgy topic. So if a person knows that, okay, we're going to talk about sex tomorrow evening after work. Great. you know,
Yeah.
versus like, oh God, when are we going to talk about it? I don't know. Is my partner like me? I don't know. Are they upset? Like, you know, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot of fear and insecurity, and that is connected to sex for a lot of people.
Yeah. And there's such power when you get into that actual conversation of sticking to I statements. And I know you've probably heard this 100 times, but some of the best, most powerful things are really that simple. Just say, I felt this way when this happened. Not you did this thing right or you did this thing wrong. Like really about your own experience. And I have an article on my website called The Better Sex Conversation. It could be helpful, you know, with some of these things too. There's some risque photos in that article, so it's probably not safe for work, but they're not nude, but they definitely are sensual-ish.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Great.
Yeah, it's just, I just want to encourage people. It's such an important thing to talk about. And if you've never talked about it with your partner, that's fine too. I mean, that it's not necessarily, you didn't do anything wrong. Our culture didn't say it's good to talk about this stuff. You know, now you have the opportunity to actually create scenarios that are fun and exciting that you want. And that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity to have. So I want to get into the sex and spirituality from this point.
Awesome.
Where do we start with that?
Is that a rhetorical question, or you're asking me literally where do we start?
No, it's a real question. I'd like to hear your process.
All right. Where do we start? I'm going to take a deep breath. I encourage you, Alec, and all of us to take a deep breath in. I love this topic. It's so rich. And for me, well, I want to say first that sex and spirituality are two of the most important topics for a lot of people in this experience of life, and also two of the most potentially charged topics, you know, with different beliefs and different fears and all this stuff. And when I'm speaking of things, when I'm saying something like spiritual sexual experience, I'm thinking in terms of a state of presence, first of all. So when I mentioned earlier my experiences in yoga teacher trainings and meditation, even sometimes when I was younger in different types of worship services, you can get into this state of reverence. You can get into the state of feeling connected to things. You could call it life. You could call it God. You could call it Yeshua. You could call it Jesus. You could call it, you know, whoever, whatever, all sorts of different deities. And this is really, in many ways, referring to an internal state of being where you tangibly feel a connection to something that's greater than yourself. And when you're able to access that same state of, you know, tangible feelings of connection and divinity in the sexual experience, A, it's beautiful and incredible, and B, it can open up the doors to so much just heartwarming, heart-opening passion and vulnerability and connection, and, you know, the kind of sex where you're looking into your partner's eyes and you're crying with each other because it's so beautiful and you feel connected to the divine while you're making love. And it's, you know, there's worship in the sexual experience. You know, there's the actual practice of worshiping and reverence for each other and for life in the sexual experience. And this is one aspect of spiritual sexuality, or sexual spirituality, you know, or the yogic sexuality, if you want to call it that. This is one part of that, is in the actual sexual experience. How deeply and how fully can you show up? And when you're making love with your partner, are you just, you know, having sex with them, or are you making love with their soul? Are you really meeting them in this place of deep connection and deep presence? And to me, so much about spirituality is presence and how you show up in any given moment. And so this is one aspect of spiritual sexuality. And another aspect to me is how this impacts the rest of our lives too. And so, well, first let me pause there and see, I just said a bunch of things. How did that sound to you? Did that bring up any questions or thoughts, reflections?
No, not really. I mean, this is stuff that I think about quite a bit also, so it's not brand new for me.
Cool.
I think it was beautifully explained, though. I enjoyed that.
Great. So, all right, there's two more elements I want to talk about. One of those is the energetic polarity within relationship, and then also how this impacts the larger state of your life. And I was going to jump into the larger state, but I'll jump back into polarity for a second. Mm-hmm. For people who have, how do I want to say this? It actually applies to all bodies, but specifically, if you're a person who has a penis and if you're a person who has ejaculatory orgasms where semen comes out, then one part of sexual spirituality to me means looking at your sexual programming around how often do you ejaculate, and do you see ejaculation as the goal of the sexual experience? Do you go into the sexual experience thinking and knowing that the point of this for you is to ejaculate, or is the point for you to experience deep connection with yourself and deep connection with your lover and deep pleasure with your lover and deep pleasure with yourself? And this is going to result in a fundamentally different kind of lovemaking experience. And so what I personally practice is I don't ejaculate every time I have sex with my partner. I choose to ejaculate once every 7 to 12 to 14 days or something like that, with as much sex as I want in that time period. And if this is the first time you're hearing something like this, you might be thinking like, what the fuck, man? What's wrong with this guy? What's wrong with this guy? But this is based on some actual research that's out there, and also my subjective experience of this, and my subjective experience of what I call polarity in relationship, which is the charge that I feel with my partner. And everybody's familiar with the charge that you feel with your new partner. If you're in a new relationship for the first 6 months, a lot of people call this a honeymoon phase. Turns out there are actually ways to increase this and prolong this and make this something that sustains itself throughout relationship through intentionality with how you approach your relationship and also in sex. So this charge, if you have a penis, generally speaking, after you have an ejaculatory orgasm, that charge dissipates. You lose your erection, and a lot of times you lose interest in sex and you want to eat some food or go to sleep. No shame in it. Like, I get it. I love it too, and it's great. You have sex, you ejaculate, you want some food, and you go to sleep. Like, what more do you want? Life is good, but the problem comes in if you're wanting to have sex more regularly. And say you have sex with your partner multiple times a day, eventually there's going to become a point, maybe 2 days in, 3 days in, 5 days in, where you're not going to want sex with your partner anymore. In fact, you're not even going to want to be around your partner necessarily anymore, because you've ejaculated so much. Your system is not, you don't need to have this procreative sexual experience, right? And I say procreative sexual experience because we're designed, our physiology and our biology is designed to ejaculate to perpetuate the species. And if you do that a lot in a row, you don't need to do that anymore because you've perpetuated the species, at least according to our internal biology. And this is shown in a research study that's often known as the Coolidge effect. I'm sure some of you listening have heard of this, but the Coolidge effect is basically these researchers put a few different rats in a cage, as researchers do. And all the time. And these, at first they put a male rat and a female rat in a cage, and they looked at their mating frequency. And sure enough, they mated again, and the time in between their mating sessions expanded, and it increased until he was basically not interested in this female rat anymore. And this is similar to what happens in long-term monogamous relationship. Interesting switch to the study. All of a sudden, they bring in a new female rat over and over and over, a new person. And this male rat has sex with a new female rat over and over and over, and ejaculates and ejaculates and ejaculates, and eventually has so much sex that it sexes itself to death, and the rat dies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the rat literally dies from oversex, which is like mind blowing, first of all. And I'm not saying that us as humans is going to die from having too much sex, but the point that the study is making is that regular ejaculations leads to a loss of interest with the same partner. And this is similar in human relationships too. And so what I've personally found is that when I choose to ejaculate once a week with my partner instead of every time we have sex, that we get into less arguments. We have more feelings of harmony, generally speaking, throughout our relationship. Our feeling of charge and our feeling of zest and sexual attraction for each other remains constant versus going in these waves of up and down, depending on when we last had sex. And there's this, it's just much more beautifully consistent state of being that we both exist in relationship. And for me, that's spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's an awesome manifestation. I think a lot of men use that tactic of, essentially trying to find a new partner to keep themselves interested in sex over and over again. And it's not without many different types of consequences.
Totally. Yeah. And I don't want to say that sort of thing is bad necessarily. Like, there are some people who are having sex with multiple people regularly and doing it with great intention, and it's working out wonderfully for everybody involved. I think the key difference here, and the thing that makes, something spiritual or not, in my opinion, is intentionality. How are you approaching this experience with your internal energetics in mind? Not only your internal energetics, but what impact is this going to have on the people that you're connecting with? Is this going to lift them up, or is this going to create chaos somehow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not anti-poly. I know I have seen it work really well for some people. I think it is actually a form of engaging in relationship that, when done properly, really requires an incredible amount of communication and self-awareness and selflessness as well, among many other things. So I'm definitely not anti that, but I also have seen people do the multiple partners thing in a much less healthy way. And I think, just that reminds me of college in a lot of ways. It's like everybody's just like, whoa, just like really throwing their sexual energy around kind of wildly, to see what happens, I guess, in a sense. And I was guilty of that, certainly in college. But, once I had heard a couple of people's feelings with it, I was like, I just can't do this. Like, I can't, can't be involved in intentionally doing something like that. It just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So a couple different places I'm interested in going from here. I'd like to hear some more about your relationship. You're in a monogamous relationship?
Yes. Mostly.
Okay.
Yes, it would take some clarification. I recognize that I wanted to say one more piece about the sexual spirituality, and this will be brief. And that is just to say that when you start approaching sex with greater intentionality, this can literally impact your entire life and all your relationships, from your friendships to your family, to your children, to your boss, to your work. Maybe you're the boss, to your employees, like all this stuff. Like, once you're, getting rid of all the shame in your sexuality and approaching it with great intention, it's going to change how you feel about yourself in general. And this greater confidence and this greater openness is just going to have a beautiful ripple effect through the rest of your life. And I've experienced this firsthand. And I just wanted to add that piece too. And really, for me, spirituality is not about some idea of something that's going to happen after we die, or what is the ultimate truth that's happening, figuring that out. It's really more about how do I interact with people on a daily basis in a way that adds to their lives versus detracts from their lives. Like, what sort of good can I add to the world? And that's what I'm coming from with all this stuff.
Amen to that, brother.
Yeah. Practical embodied spirituality. It's the only thing that I've found personally that really lights me up consistently.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a beautiful mission to have, and I really do think it's just like deeply, sorely needed in the world. I think especially in America, in a way. I mean, one interesting thing we have in America is this, like, the general separation of church and state, and the type of, like, what's the word? Like, just extremely varied arrangement of spiritual or religious traditions that are all mixing together.
Yeah.
And I think it really has, like, a lot of beauty and a lot of dark that comes with it as well. But I think what I've noticed from a lot of younger people is they're actually really craving this type of connection and deeper spiritual experiences in their lives. But there's so much dogma and negative programming and like confusion about it that they have a really hard time even knowing where to start connecting with it. And what I've seen is, I've noticed a lot of people finding it through psychedelics, mm-hmm. and through music and art.
Yeah.
And then also just a lot of people not really knowing where to look.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a confusing, it can be a confusing landscape. It can be a wild landscape.
So practical embodied spirituality is a really great sentence that I want to just put another bookmark in.
Yeah. Embodied spiritual practice, like this is something that, yeah, I think it's so, so, so important, because what people are seeking is when somebody's seeking something, and I'm speaking from personal experience when I'm younger, generally when somebody is seeking some sort of spiritual depth or spiritual connection, they're seeking a certain internal state, right? They're looking for, and they might not know this, but what you're really looking for is an internal state of deep ease and feeling of connection with something that's greater than yourself. And when you do feel this thing, a lot of different people from different traditions will label it different things. You could say this is connection with the divine, connection with source, connection with Christ consciousness, connection with Yeshua, connection with Atman and Brahman, there's so many different things. And really, all story aside, like, this is talking about a subjective internal experience of deep connection and meaning. And you can get that in psychedelics, you can get that at a concert. A lot of people get that when they're snowboarding or when you're mountain biking, or when you're dancing. And so then this brings up the question, okay, what's actually happening? A lot of those things that I just spoke about, you're in a state of flow, especially action sports. Yeah, you raise your finger.
Will you just say that sentence one more time? I had a glitch here, and I'm not positive it got recorded.
All right. Which one?
The last sentence that you said.
The long one? The whole thing? It's okay. I'm just curious what you heard.
It was right after you were talking about snowboarding and mountain biking.
Got it. Yeah. So then that brings up the question, like, what's actually happening in those experiences? And we're looking at a flow state, where somebody is so present in the moment. They're so present in the moment that they're not thinking about anything else. They're not yearning for anything else. They're not thinking about, what does this mean? Which God or which deity should I pray to? What's going to happen after I die? It's like, no, you're so immersed in the moment that you're just in a state of presence and action and reaction and stimulation. And it feels incredible. It feels incredible. And this state of flow is very similar in some ways, two states of deep connection you can experience on psychedelics and at a music concert and in beautiful experiences of lovemaking, and this state of flow, when you enter into it, this is something that yogic sexuality talks about. And this is what a lot of people talk about when they talk about tantric sex. You're so in the moment of lovemaking that you completely lose yourself in the moment. But another way to say that is you don't lose yourself, but you become your full self, and you just are, you just are, period. In reverence, in pleasure. And and so it's no surprise to me that psychedelics are as popular as they are. And it's no surprise to me that concerts are as fun as they are. They give us access to something that we can't experience otherwise. And I'll pause there. What's that? Group ecstasy.
Ecstasy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you read Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheal?
Did they write Stealing Fire?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a high recommendation for anybody listening to this. Check out those two authors, Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheal. They're some of the foremost flow researchers, and they really tie it in with a lot of like interesting connections with modern society and culture. Like talk about how Burning Man creates this type of experiences, or how, like what you're saying, snowboarding, skiing, mountain biking, etc. And they talk about the kind of like the spiritual connection and ecstasy of it, and the neurochemical concoction that you get from it that makes you feel so good.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome.
So highly recommended.
Yeah.
I actually just ordered his new book, and I've been listening to them on podcasts recently. They just came back up into my mind.
Nice.
And also thinking about how I can create more flow in my workspace, because in the past I've done a lot of work that's been outside, moving around, like ski instructing, mountain bike instructing, like super physically engaging and stimulating activities.
Yeah. And
now I'm doing a lot of mind work on the computer and sitting at my desk drawing and stuff like that. And it's more difficult. It's just more difficult for me to like really get into a flow state doing that. So I've been thinking about how I can engage with that and bring it into my everyday practice with like triggers,
Yeah. Yeah. Big topic.
Yeah, I think you described a lot of my spiritual practice with that too. Like it's for a long time, that's how I've been seeking it out. And skiing in particular, and mountain biking, and now surfing have been my regular spiritual practice of embodied presence, nature connection, and physicality, putting all those things together. And I think bringing it back to sex, I think something that brings people out of that, or makes it difficult for them to experience that in their sexual life, is this focus on performance and results. Like, how many orgasms are we going to have? Can I give her an orgasm? Can she give me an orgasm? Like, that kind of thing. Because we want that. We want that for ourselves, and we want to help our partners to experience it also. But too much pressure and too much focus prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
What can you say about this?
Well, it's interesting if you think about the statement, I want to give her an orgasm, and we dissect that a little bit. What is that actually saying? Like, yes, you want to give your partner pleasure, and orgasm is seen, it's a commonly understood metric of pleasure, right? Like, we hear the word orgasm, we think, oh, that means a highly pleasurable sexual experience for somebody, oftentimes resulting in a release of tension and a rush of good feelings. And so, like, if that's indeed what orgasm is, then if you want to give your partner an orgasm, what you really want to do is give them a highly pleasurable experience. It's going to result in, feelings of great pleasure throughout their entire body, and it will result in ease and connection. And that could be regardless of whether they have an orgasm or not. And I think this hyper focus on orgasm has detracted and can detract a lot from the sexual experience. And if you instead make pleasure the goal, like in the moment pleasure, what feels good, now, and now what feels good, and now what feels good. And if you follow that, then that's going to lead to cumulatively so much more pleasure than if you're just seeking the orgasm. Because if you're seeking the orgasm, you're probably going to do things that or that you think would precipitate an orgasm. Maybe that's moving your fingers a certain way when you touch your partner's genitals. Maybe that's licking them in one particular way. But whatever way that is, it's coming from your own patterns of sex and all the things that you've learned over time. And if you instead approach it from the realm of curiosity and following what feels good, all of a sudden you might find that you're nibbling on your partner's shoulder blade and they're loving it. And it's like one of the most pleasurable things that you've both ever experienced. And you had no idea why, but it just is. And it feels amazing. And then maybe you move to the neck. And then maybe instead of moving to their mouth to kiss them, like maybe all of a sudden you're smelling their armpit and it smells amazing. Like whatever, like whatever that is. And then maybe you do have penetrative sex, or maybe you don't. But if you approach sex from this explorative, curious, open, pleasure following pathway, like it's beautiful. And then ironically, that is what opens the doors to having all these different kinds of orgasms, the multiple non-ejaculatory orgasms for men, multiple orgasms for women, well, for all body types, regardless of gender. Like when you approach sex with pleasure as the goal instead of orgasm, more orgasms are a byproduct of that, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing. Makes sense. There's something about trying too hard that seems to like really not work with most things. There's like a level of presence and skill that's much more that works much better than being like, oh, I need this to happen. Like pushing too hard,
For sure.
In whatever way, it applies to so many different things.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a guy, I don't know, like 8 or 10 years ago in Asheville. And it was this group of guys hanging out, and he thought that he like had uncovered the method to make all women squirt, and he was now like squirt God. And he said to us, he's like, all right, so the current woman I was with, and then the last person, I figured out how to make them squirt. But what you do, and for those of you listening, we have video on. You won't be able to see this, but he did this thing where he like slapped his hand down on his other hand. He's like, this is what you got to do with your hand. You put it there, you curl your fingers like this, you put it inside them, and then you just like go really hard, really vigorously, and then they'll squirt. And that's it. And I remember thinking like, man, I think there's actually a lot more to it than that. Like you can't just like force women to squirt, and and I think that's just a really useful example because there's just a lot more to it than that. There's feeling safe, there's feeling connected, there's like, in order to have an experience, if you have a vagina where you actually release in that way, like you need to feel safe enough to do so. And if some guy is just trying to like, get his arm going real hard inside you for the result of squirting, it's probably not going to be so attractive to you,
Right. Some people probably are into it.
Maybe some people are, and that's great. That's great.
So yeah, let's get into that deeper. Like, rather than approaching it with that way, how would you recommend people do it if that's what the experience they're looking to create?
You mean in terms of focusing on pleasure instead of orgasm?
No, I mean specifically squirting.
Oh, okay. We're going that direction. All right. Well, I do not claim to be a expert on helping people squirt. Yeah, God, even, saying it like that, the word feels a little funny. Like
a funny word.
Squirt, female ejaculation. I really like the word amrita more.
Yeah,
Amrita.
It's a beautiful,
beautiful, sexy word. It's interesting. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce her last name correctly or not, but sorry, Emily, if I butcher this, but Emily Nagoski, she wrote a book called Come As You Are. It's an incredible book for anybody who's really interested in in how sexual response systems work and you want to dive deep into that. Her book is amazing. And she talks about how in some of her workshops and classes, she'll get anonymous questions from her students, and she'll get an equal amount of these two different kinds of questions from women in her courses. There's first kind is, Emily, I really want to know how to squirt. How can I do that? And then the other equal amount is, Emily, I really want to stop squirting. I feel like I do it way too much and it's a pain. So I remember reading that and thinking, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a problem for people either.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it could be really inconvenient if every time you have sex, a large amount of fluid releases from your genitals on whatever or wherever you are. Like,
yeah, that would be an issue for sure.
Like we as penis havers, like when we ejaculate, there's just a tiny bit of fluid that comes out. But some people, when they squirt or have female ejaculation, it's like, it's a large amount of fluid,
Yeah, I can see why that would be problematic, and if it's happening all over the place.
Yeah. And so what I would say is, like, again, I do understand if you want to have the tangible experience of squirting, or you want to give that to your partner, like that does make sense. And I would say, if you do want to have that experience or share that experience with your lover, then you will be better off if you approach it, again, with pleasure as the goal, and a certain kind of pleasure that could possibly result in squirting, but that you will be completely fine if squirting doesn't happen. Like, if you make squirting the goal, then you might, lose connection, or at worst, like, actually do something that really doesn't feel pleasant inside of a person's vagina,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah,
worse.
Absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of mechanics and stuff, but you can Google that.
Yeah. I already have.
And like, just from a personal subjective standpoint, like, I have found it to be incredibly erotic when my partner has, had an ejaculatory orgasm, a female ejaculatory orgasm. I'm in relationship with a woman who has a vagina, and it's sexy, but I do find that if my mind gets attached to that idea, then it's less likely to happen. If I start doing the mechanical motions of what should make a squirting experience happen, it's less likely to happen than if we're having a beautiful lovemaking experience, and then I follow pleasure, and then I'm touching her in this way that feels really good for her. And then from that place of deeper connection and pleasure, she just happens to have a release in that way. Then bam,
Good.
Bam is the wrong word, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it might be hard to make the right sound effect, but
yeah,
I think it was a beautiful description.
Yeah.
So you're in a monogamish relationship. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
I can. Yeah. It's good. I was going to ask to segue in this direction because I remember you speaking on it. So I have been in polyamorous dynamics for years. I have tried the multiple partner thing. I've tried the date around thing. I've tried the all kinds of stuff thing. And it's just like fucking drove me crazy. And there were some beautiful aspects of it too. But it took way too much of my energy to manage. And I realized there were a lot more things I wanted to do in this world besides managing my romantic relationships as a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
So the other side of this, so I'll say, like, monogamy has its allures, right? There's a huge security in knowing that you're wanting to be with this one person and that you're not going to want to pursue other relationships or other partnerships or other sexual experiences on your own. And from that place of security, you can rest and relax into the beauty of your relationship and focus all of that other energy onto your projects, onto your business, onto whatever, raising your children, etc. Like there's so many more, you're so much more free and open. In terms of if you were in a polyamorous dynamic, which happens to some people when they have to, spend literally 10 hours a week just managing emotions in their relationships. Some people can do it beautifully, and I applaud them for that. And there were periods of my polyamory days when I was in that beautiful space for long extended periods of time. But I wanted to try this new kind of relationship, new for me, because I had been in polydynamics for like 5 years. And so I am in this relationship right now, and it's beautiful. And we are only dating each other, and we are not seeking out other relationships, or we're not seeking out sexual interactions with other people outside of the relationship. But what we are doing, and this is why I say monogamish, is that we are interested in, open to, and occasionally seek out sharing sexual experiences with other people together as a couple. And this is really fun and exciting for me. Obviously, like threesomes and foursomes, like threesomes specifically, are one of the biggest fantasies of most people out there for all body types and all genders. And this can be a really beautiful thing to explore with your partner. And this is something that we have explored, and with really good success so far, actually, because of the amount of intentionality we're bringing to it. And also I am open to, so we have had threesome experiences with other women, other people who identify as women, and we are also open to having a threesome experience with another man at some point. And I'm open to that too. And I'm not bisexual, but I do think it would be a really fun experience to share in that way. And also we're open to and interested in, how do I say? I guess, a common term is swingers. Like if you think about it,
Yeah.
But I hate that word at the same time, because when I think of swingers, like I think of like old people on a boat, like like a retired old folks swingers gathering. I don't know why the fuck that's my association with swingers, but it is.
Yeah, I think that is for a lot of people. Wife swapping.
Yeah, and but I don't know another term that more adequately describes this particular style of relationship. Like I'm not looking to go out and go wife swapping with a bunch of people, but I do love sharing sexual experiences with my partner and other people. And we're interested in doing this with other couples too. And so it's been a really beautiful thing, and it's actually brought us closer together. And after we've had these experiences, we feel more connected, we feel more alive, we feel more trusting of each other, because we've had all these preparatory conversations about what our needs and desires and fears are. And then we have an extensive process of getting to know somebody before we even begin to thinking about being sexual with them. We'll have conversations with them about, what are your intentions and desires and needs and fears and expectations and all this stuff. And so we've been open, we've been in a relationship for, well, I would say we've been open to exploring threesome type dynamics for about 10 months and maybe 9 months. And we've only done that maybe 3 times. And we've had lots of opportunities to do it more than that, but it feels really important to us to only go into those realms if it feels absolutely 100% safe and exciting to do so. And there's a lot of situations out there that could potentially train wreck your relationship, and so this is like definitely something that's playing with fire for sure. And it takes an immense amount of conversation and intentionality to do it well. But if you do it well, it can be beautiful and super sexy and fun and glorious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So a little bit more about that. Like what types of conversations do you find yourself having with both with your partner and with the people who you're going to engage with before you make the decision to actually go for it?
Yeah. So with my partner, with my girlfriend, we talk about what are our desires for this experience? Like, why do we actually want to have this experience? Get really clear on that. Is it because I just want to fuck another woman, or is it because I want to have the experience of sensually exploring in a dynamic where three people are all interested in each other, and there's a certain synergy that can happen there that's just literally not possible with two people, like, have you ever experienced a four-handed sensual massage? No? Well, damn. Like, that's something I can't give somebody by myself. I need another person there to be able to do that, and the experience of receiving that is incredible. And so if you think that there's only one way to have a threesome, like, no, you can have a threesome that's just purely an erotic massage where you don't even have oral sex with anybody. No penetrative sex happens. You just take turns being on a massage table, and two people touch one person, and it feels sensual and sexual and beautiful, And so that's a little segue from what I was really saying, but like, that feels like an important thing to put in there. And so we would talk about
starter kit, the threesome starter kit.
It is threesome starter kit for sure. And so and then with my partner and I, we talked authentically about our fears, like our real fears, and shared those with each other. And one of her fears was that I would be sexual with another woman and then want to be with this other person and then want to leave the relationship. And that makes a lot of sense, like that's, like, it's an understandable fear. And, it was, we didn't really start exploring this together until we had a deep foundation of love and trust in our relationship that felt solid enough that we could do this without worrying about rocking the boat. And for example, like, my fear was actually the same because my partner identifies as bisexual, and I had a fear that maybe my partner would get really attracted to this woman, and this woman would be really attracted to her, and then they would want to go off and do their own thing, and then all of a sudden they'd want to go on their dates. And so many guys like idealize two women connecting, and they think it's going to be the best thing ever until this happens in your relationship. And then you realize, like, it doesn't matter if your woman's with another man or another woman, like, they're with another human, and then all of a sudden they're not putting as much energy into your relationship, and then all of a sudden it's painful and it's scary. This is a very real thing that happens too. So that was a fear of mine. And we talked about this, and then we even came up with a boundary. And so one of our boundaries is that I will not have penetrative penis in vagina sex with a woman in our first sexual experience as a trio. And that created a big feeling of safety, not only for my partner, but also for the women that we have connected with, because then they know that it's not just some guy trying to fuck another woman. It's like, oh, this couple is actually really solid and they care about their relationship tremendously enough that they're willing to put in all this work and set up boundaries and things beforehand. Wow, I feel so much safer. Yes, I'm going to go explore with them. And I still have not, to this day, had penetrative sex with another woman in one of our threesomes. And I also don't necessarily feel the need to, because what I really enjoy about these experiences is the sensual connection of three people experiencing each other in presence and in pleasure at the same time. There's just a magic to that that's fun and it's different,
Awesome.
Yeah,
that sounds like a good framework from which to build on. People are interested in giving this a try themselves.
Totally. And what I will say is that Better Sex Conversation article that I referenced on my website, we basically follow that formula with a new person. We talk about everything in that list with a new person before we're sexual with them. And that covers everything from genital health status, STIs, to desires, to relationship styles, to sexual identity, gender identity, like all this stuff, Really good conversation to have. And I didn't come up with it. I learned it from other people.
Okay, great. So how long have you and your partner been together?
Going on a year. So not super long term, but it feels different than any relationship I've been in before because of the level of intentionality we're bringing to it. It's super exciting and I'm really happy.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. I'm super happy for you as well.
Thanks.
So you're a Gemini, correct?
Yes.
And your partner?
Good Lord, man, I don't know.
Uh-oh. It's live, folks.
Early February is her birthday. Maybe you could tell me.
I'm sure you must know her birthday at least.
Yeah, I do. This I know, but I couldn't tell you what her sign is.
That's cool. So she's an Aquarius then.
Is she? All right.
So so you have the air sign compatibility, which tends to be very good, especially for communication, because the air element represents the mind and the intellect, and also that turning into speech. So there's a lot of like communicativeness that is very important with air signs, especially. I'm surprised you guys haven't talked about that, living in Asheville and everything.
Yeah, well, it's funny, like we're of a particular kind of breed of people, which is one of the reasons I love her so much. But we're both like very much into embodied spirituality, and we both like psychedelics, and we both like yoga, and we both, I've done all this stuff, but also we both don't dive really deeply into specific structures of belief around things. And for whatever reason, that just works for us,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, astrology is kind of like a different language also. It's like if you haven't put in the time to really learn the language, it's like somebody's talking to you in Spanish and you don't speak Spanish. Like you understand some of the words, but like you can't really put together the meaning of everything they're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So, shoot, I had another question on the tip of my tongue. Oh yeah, okay. So you said you're interested in psychedelics. That's one of my favorite topics, and something that I think is very important to get into in today's world, especially.
Yeah.
Have you at all experimented with that in your sexual life?
Yes and no. So it's an interesting question.
Really?
Interesting question. So whenever I've tried to be sexual on psychedelics, it just doesn't work, man. For whatever reason, like we get really interested in the fabric on the sheets, or like the way the hair looks in the light or something like that. And sex just like, it's not like it's not appealing. There are other things that are more eye-catching or something, like, I don't know how else to describe it. I think it would be interesting to have sex on psychedelics at some point, but I remember even trying to do this one point. We were like, oh yeah, let's take mushrooms and then we'll try having a sex experience, and then we both ended up getting enraptured by this orange, and it's just like peeling an orange and like eating it really slowly and looking at the colors. And then all of a sudden we were stretching, and then we just never had sex,
Yeah.
So I don't know, but what I will say,
pleasure.
What's that?
Following the pleasure.
Yeah. But what I will say is that I have had fully psychedelic experiences during sex.
Yeah.
When I've entered into these, what some people would call the tantric realms, or the energetic realms of sex, or when you merge the spiritual and the sexual. Like, I've had experiences where it's full on like I'm tripping, the walls are doing this like thing where they're waving, and seeing static and sparkles flow through everything, and I'm seeing waves of energy in my partner's body. It's like the Alex Gray paintings,
Yeah.
but sober, just high on sex,
Yeah.
And it's, it's incredible. It's incredible. And again, it's a byproduct. It's not like I go into sex looking to have a psychedelic experience, but I get so lost in the pleasure of sex that it becomes psychedelic in nature,
That would be a funny way of approaching it.
Oh man. It's funny that tonight my girlfriend, she's going to be coming over in about a little over a half an hour, and we have a date planned. And our plan for tonight is actually to explore doing some sexual breathwork practices with each other. And both of us have been doing breathwork every day for the month of January, and we're going to continue to do it for the rest of this month. And I will say that breathwork has also given me some psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to try some of the things we're going to try tonight while in different sexual positions, maybe having penetrative sex or maybe not. But we're going to try doing some Wim Hof style breathing while in the Yab Yam position. See what happens.
Cool.
See if we can dissociate ourselves enough from the sound of Wim Hof's voice while we're having sex to actually.
Are you gonna actually have a? Are you gonna have the voice playing or the Wim Hof app?
Now breathe in,
letting go.
let's go. Now breathe in,
Breathe, letting go.
relax.
Now breathe.
Oh boy, that's hilarious.
Yeah, Wim is, he's one of my favorite people. He's an amazing guy.
He is. And no, we do our own practice that's based on the Wim Hof style breath work. It's basically that, but we don't always do 30. Sometimes we do 32 and we breathe in a slightly different way. But that's going to be our formula tonight. We're going to be in the Yabian position and experiment with that, and experiment in a few different positions and just see what happens.
Cool.
Just see what happens. And you looked like you maybe were about to say something.
Oh, well, I have some more sex on psychedelics.
Do it. Hit me.
Things to throw out there while we're on it.
Hit me, because I can just talk, man. So I want to. What do you hit me?
Yeah. So my experience with it have been that it's like dosage and psychedelic choice are very important. So I've had both the experience of kind of like trying it and just being like, okay, like it's cool, like this isn't really, we're not really feeling it, but like we love you and we love each other anyway, and it's all good. We're just like, that type of thing. And then I've also had the other experience where it's like really been an incredible enhancer of the experience that has like taken me to some places that I hadn't really experienced before, but in a sense, I believe helped me to go back there in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was with one of those was with LSD. I found psilocybin, like too much psilocybin kind of gets like too wobbly and silly, and maybe too much hallucination as well for like to really go into a sexual place. But my wife and I like to play around with small, medium doses of that, and I found that to be like really, really pleasant and beautiful for sexual connection. And the other thing I wanted to throw out there was their marijuana lube has like created some like really wild psychedelic sex experiences that I totally wasn't expecting to come from that at all. Yeah. But anyways, just putting that out there for you guys at home if you're interested in playing some of these games. Yeah. Yeah, and I think I feel like with something like MDMA or MDMA or MDA or MDMA, it can be like, I've heard of it being like so intense and pleasurable that it almost makes it hard to enjoy sex on, in your regular, awakened state. But I've also heard that can be really cool. So I've
taken small amounts of MDMA at different play parties and things too, and I've found that it's so interesting too. And maybe I just have some strange interaction with psychedelics and stuff, but whenever I've done that, I love touching people and being sensual and kissing and stuff. But when it comes to actual genital stimulation, it's like, like, I don't know. It's just not that exciting for me. I don't know why that is. And I started laughing when you were sharing your experience about too much acid and sex, because last fall I did go to the beach with some people and we took some acid and did, yoga and stuff and went to the beach. And then my girlfriend and we came back in and we started being sexual with people. And I remember I was going down on her and we were still like in the midst of it all, and she was looking at me like, whoa. It's like, she was like, I don't think this is a good idea right now. Your face is doing weird things. And I was like, you're probably right. Like, let's go back to the beach.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So I can see what you're saying with there's an appropriate amount,
Yeah.
And one thing also that you said that I think is beautiful is it's like, in your experiences with psychedelics and sex, you feel like it showed you something that maybe you hadn't seen before that you could go back to later.
Yeah.
And personally, this is like one of the huge things and the huge learnings that I've experienced from psychedelics is like, it's not that it necessarily, well, how would I say? It's that it shows me another possibility of reality that I might not have seen beforehand. And it also shows me like, you can do this later without being on psychedelics. You know, it's like, oh, here's a gift, you know, but you have to choose to act on it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important lessons of it. And even like, I mean, another thing is you can, again, with micro dosing, kind of go to the same place, but without having to have like a, you know, a whatever, like 12-hour LSD experience. You can just be able to tap in.
Yeah.
I've found it to be like incredibly interesting and helpful for extreme sports also. But again, the dosage becomes very important, even more so, I would say, than with sex, because the consequences are a lot higher.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Depending on how you look at consequences.
It's true. I mean, you might get the idea that it's really good to have a child all of a sudden on psychedelics, and you might do something you might not have otherwise done.
Right.
And that's pretty high consequence.
Yeah, consequence, yeah.
You know?
Different kind of consequence, but yeah.
Different kind of consequence, for sure.
Yeah, cool. So that's a lot of fun stuff to be explored there.
For sure.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk about, I saw in one of your posts you're talking about food, specifically about the way that we do farming in the United States. And I want to get into a little bit what you think the connection between healthy diet and a healthy sex life is.
That's a big topic, but yeah, awesome topic. When I think of a healthy diet, the first thing that comes to mind is hydration, honestly. It's like, how much water are we drinking? And it's, yeah, right. This is why I've had this big cup of tea next to me this whole time. I had a nice cup of ginger tea here. And so many of us are dehydrated constantly, and not to the point of, you know, experiencing medical problems, but like, we're severely underhydrated, and this impacts our mental performance, our cognition. It impacts our physical performance in so many different areas of our life. And so the first thing I think about is, yes, drink more water, hydrate yourself, and do it again. You know, and this is just general good health advice, but you better believe that this will translate into the sexual experience too, because you'll experience less fatigue, which will lead to less cramping, which will lead to more pleasure, which, I mean, there's so many different things, you know? So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And then also, you know, there's the interesting analogy that I'm not sure I've made anywhere else before, but it just kind of hit me to say in this particular way. I think that how we approach food is often how we approach sex, or it can be. So if you're somebody who always goes to you immediately go to the junk food aisle and you like down a whole bag of Cheetos, and you just like, you pop some food in the microwave and that's your dinner, and you don't take your time with stuff, but you eat a bunch of like shit, you know, it's possible that you might not take that much time with your sexual experiences either. Maybe, you know, maybe not.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, but I do want to say, like, sex is a physical activity that involves presence and some amount of physical performance and stamina to do. So the more healthy your diet is in general, the better and more able you are to do that in a good way, you know? And of course, there are all sorts of other nuanced rabbit holes we could go with this, like what foods are good to eat before sex and not before sex. Like, how do you optimize your digestion so you're able to be more present during sex? Like, are there any supplements you should be taking? And all this stuff is honestly not stuff that I've gone deeply into in terms of the research, but it's interesting stuff to think about for sure. And specifically, here are two things that I would recommend people think about. Number one is sugar intake. Sugar intake is huge. It's huge. And sugar intake can catalyze addictive reactions and responses in our system. When you have more sugar, you want more sugar, you know, and when you have more sugar, again, you want more sugar, and it can reinforce this sort of instant gratification mindset and belief system that, in my opinion, can reinforce instant gratification in all areas of your life. Like, oh, I just want the quick fix. Oh, I'm just going to have the quick ejaculation, you know? Oh, I'm just going to have the quick sexual experience. I'm not going to take the time to create the full course meal with a healthy appetizer and main dish and balanced things and an actual healthy dessert. I'm just going to eat the bag of Cheetos and like a hot dog. Fuck it. You know?
I like your metaphor. I think like porn is the junk food of sex, I guess.
Yeah, porn is the junk food of sex, but also just like short sex that's completely without presence, that's just for the sake of getting off, could be the junk food of sex too.
Mm-hmm.
And also like
that could be a microwave meal.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with doing that sometimes. Like sometimes you just, like last night, for example, I had an evening Zoom call with a bunch of people, and I didn't have time to do anything. So I got a frozen pizza and I baked it and I ate it, and it was great. But I'm not going to do that every day because my body wouldn't be happy. You know, I need to be eating vegetables and good, healthy things to keep my system optimized.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Indeed. And the other thing is stimulants in general, like chocolate, cacao, caffeine, any of these sorts of things. I've found that they can impact my sexual abilities. Specifically, if I drink a lot of caffeine or eat a lot of stimulant type food during the day and then try to have sex later that evening, my body is much more likely to either not want sex or, you know, not have the erection that I want, or ejaculate too quickly or something like that, because my system and my adrenals are just worn out from the day. You know?
You've already been stimulated all day.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's helpful. I feel like that's something I've been looking at recently, is just taking in less caffeine. And I was going pretty hard on the stimulants for a while there, and I've been doing a good job of scaling it back. So, and I've also noticed the benefits of that in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
No need to go too deeply into that weird adventure that I went on.
It's fascinating stuff though. Yeah.
Although now that I said it out loud, I had for a while, like a couple of years ago, I was going to a psychiatrist, and eventually I end up getting prescribed ADHD medication.
Mm-hmm. Which one are you open to sharing?
Vyvanse.
Vyvanse, got it.
Mm-hmm. And it was really crazy and interesting how it changed my life during that time. Mm-hmm. But I eventually I noticed that, and I also noticed that I was becoming very dependent on it, and I didn't think that it was a good pathway to go down.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of indicative of the way that we handle issues in our society in general, like health issues, is mm-hmm. where basically our model is to prescribe to alleviate symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And that model oftentimes leads us to adding and adding and adding, when in fact what we really need to do is take away. And I think something I've been thinking about a lot this year is that, like, we're in this health crisis, right? Mm-hmm. It's 2021. We have this virus going around that's like literally spread out all over the world.
Yeah.
But everybody who's having almost everybody who's having really adverse effects from it are people who are in really bad health. But instead of thinking, okay, like, what can we do as a nation to help people to reach a higher level of health, mm-hmm. we're just like, okay, everybody hide in your house until you can take the drugs to keep you safe from this virus.
Yeah.
What the fuck's going on, Taylor?
Oh boy, well, this is a big rabbit hole. I don't know if you saw my latest Facebook post.
That might have been the one is it about your new alien upgrade?
No, it's the one I just made yesterday.
Oh, okay.
God, I mean, such a big topic, I do want to say, like, I know a couple people who got coronavirus who were by all intensive purposes completely healthy, shining examples of health, and got fucked up like big time. You know, one of them is still recovering from pneumonia like a month later after having it. And she's like a 36-year-old woman who was super healthy, super active. And just like, wow, like random, right? So I just want to acknowledge that that exists too.
Right.
And
I
it's
was
like
meaning deaths, by the way.
totally. Okay, yeah, deaths.
But
Got
that's
it.
good to know. And
Yeah,
you got through it.
and I had it. Yeah, I had coronavirus, and it didn't really impact me very much. I had a slight headache and a slight itchy back of my throat, so I was lucky or something, you know. And I think, you know, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've been doing breath work every single day and taking a cold shower every single day for almost 4 weeks now. And I think that I like to think that this helped my system deal with it in some way.
Yeah.
But who knows? But I do think it's really interesting that there, as much mass media that is out there that has talked about this, that there is such a lack of mass media encouragement for living in a healthy way. You know, for saying, hey, maybe you want to eat less sugar. You know, maybe you want to try sleeping an adequate amount every night. And these are things that don't cost extra money. Like
Right.
you don't have to buy the thing with sugar. You don't. You could, you know, there's sleep things you can do to help yourself sleep without buying anything else. You know, so it is interesting to me. It's a head scratcher, and I think part of it is just like sensationalist headlines sell. You know, and news companies exist because of advertising revenue, and that's just the deal. Like they have to get people to come into their articles because that's how they make money. And an article that says 2 million, 1,000 billion coronavirus deaths is going to bring in more money than like maybe you should start eating less sugar.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really illuminated how polluted our information economy is.
Mm-hmm.
It's, as you said, it incentivizes clickbaity, fear-based headlines and articles, and
totally.
We've seen this year to maybe to the greatest extent ever, like how damaging that system actually is of incentivizing that type of propagating fear.
Yeah.
And I'm also not saying that it's, you know, I'm not trying to say it's not real or not dangerous. I just have been sort of endlessly frustrated with our response to it. Just like,
yeah.
Oh my God, who's in charge here?
Yeah, me too. And I was on the phone with a doctor for a visit a week and a half ago, my coronavirus follow-up visit. And she was talking about, and she even works for like a big hospital here. And she's like, it's all chaos. Nobody knows what's happening. They're trying to get vaccines. Like the vaccine rollout was a shit show. Like everyone's frustrated. I'm just like, wow. And I can't even imagine trying to do what people are trying to do like to get the vaccine to everybody right now. But like, yeah, I felt endlessly frustrated too. And I felt also just, I'm so tired of everything being shut down, man. There's such virus lethargy and I'm so jaded to
It's
it all.
horrible.
And I understand. And like I don't want my parents to be going out right now, like until they get the vaccine. Like I get that too. And they'll be getting it soon, but yeah, it's chaotic, chaos, craziness. Nobody knows what to do.
The shutdown is definitely making me weary as well. I'll say also though that many blessings have happened during this year and I've been making the best of it. So I don't want to get stuck in complaining about it too much.
Yeah. And it's important to just acknowledge that it's real. And a lot of people are having a hard time right now because there's just a lot less connection to be had in person in the world. It's just the deal, you know?
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that seems to be happening with our response to it is that we've essentially succeeded in like killing off just about everything else besides the virus. Destroyed the economy and millions of businesses and people's mental health and physical health, and the virus continues.
Yeah, that's why like on my Facebook post, I said the thing like, what do you think is most possible here? Is it an alien DNA upgrade? Is it a genetically modified thing? Is it like, who knows? But is it also possible that we as a species are just like much less intelligent than we think we are? And we have no idea what we're actually doing. And we're just kind of like flailing around trying to figure out how to live in a society with crazy shit that happens. Like, I have a tendency.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to. Yeah. I have a tendency to believe that we're just not as smart as we think we are,
Yeah. I think there's a lot of general confusion going around. That's for sure.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Lots of that happening, but I'm sure people at home are sick of hearing about the virus as well. So.
Yeah. I think my girlfriend just walked in. Are you here, babe? Oh, maybe she went back outside, or maybe somebody came into my apartment.
She could probably tell you were podcasting. Do you want to wrap this thing up, or where are you at right now?
I'm down to do whatever. I didn't know we were going to go this long. This is cool. I mean, I'm enjoying the conversation. How do you usually do these things?
Well, I wanted to, if you have the time, I'd like to get into some of those other subjects that you said you wanted to get into.
Cool. Let's do it.
You sent over a list, which was in a voice message that you sent while riding your bicycle, which I did.
Yeah.
And apparently you were doing a wheelie and going backwards at the same time. Is that true?
Yes. Why not?
So what type of spiritual lessons have you learned from practicing wheelies and riding your bicycle?
Oh, man. All of them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just done. I have no problems anymore. No personal problems. I just figured out everything out. It's great. You want to solve your problems? Do wheelies on bikes.
Yeah. But not too far.
Not too far.
Not too far back, I mean.
No. I mean, yeah. One thing that I wanted to share is that I know that we've talked a bunch about spirituality earlier, and spiritual sex and psychedelics and music festivals and concerts and all this stuff. And for me, there's a lot more to spirituality than just these flow type experiences. And if you look back throughout history at all, some of the biggest spiritual leaders throughout time, these people, they didn't just sit around and have flow experiences. Like, they made service an active part of their life. They made giving an active part of their life. They made helping people an active part of their life. And I think if there's one big criticism to put on the quote unquote spiritual awakening movement, is that the focus is more on our internal subjective experience of bliss than it is to helping people have better experiences of life in the world. Mm-hmm. That's a huge one. And it really struck me today. Why I sent you that message is about 10 minutes before I sent you that message, I was on Facebook and I was looking at Ram Dass's Facebook group. And I got a notification, and whoever's running the Ram Dass account now, they posted this thing and they said, hey, everybody, we're having a satsang coming up here on this date for people who are Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, or you could say people of the global majority. And under that comment, under that post, were all these white people saying how racist that was, and how how this is not part of Ram Dass's mission at all. Like, Ram Dass talks about breaking down our personal barriers, and what are you doing? Are you just reinforcing the societal political correctness of things? What's going on here? Gender politics, identity politics, all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, my mind is blown. And so this is I don't know, it feels like a really big, important piece to talk about too, when we talk about spirituality, is what are other people's experiences of the world, And so I see all these people on there, and they're all appearing white, and they're all saying these criticisms of things. And I want to ask them, I'm like, have you ever talked to somebody who is not white about their experience of not being white in a primarily white culture that is dominated by white people, And it's to put it another way, in these spiritual circles, a lot of these new age spiritual circles, it's primarily a white audience, you know? And what's true for a lot of people who are not white is that it can feel uncomfortable or frustrating or scary to go into a room if there's only one other person or nobody else that looks like you, and you're just going into a room full of a bunch of white people. And so this is why, like, this, you know, this is why Ram Dass, the Ram Dass Foundation, is having this this satsang, which is a gathering, you know, a time for reflection and prayer for this affinity group, which is people who are not white. Is because a lot of, you know, there's people need space to connect with people who are similar to them. And it can feel really unsafe for a lot of people because, how do I want to say this? I want to say this in a way also that doesn't alienate white people who feel this way, but I might have already done that. I might have probably already did that. Gosh, it's just such an important thing. And I don't, you know, it's like, okay, here's an analogy. If you are a white person and you walk into a room and everybody in this room is black, and then they all turn to look at you. We're talking like maybe 50 people here, or 100 people, or 20 people even. They all turn to look at you when you walk in. What's your experience in that moment? You know, are you even going to have an experience at all? Is it just normal? Are you actually experiencing this as another human just walking into a space with another bunch of humans? Or are you going to experience some sort of reaction to the fact that everybody in this room looks different from you? You know, like, this is a real tangible thing that happens to people. And I don't think that people who are white understand this, you know, especially in the spiritual world, in the spiritual awakening world, whatever you want to call it. You know, does this all kind of make sense? I think I want to pause for a second and see if this is making sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this has been one of the primary discussions of the year, I feel like. And I think one of the frustrating things about it is that it seems to be very difficult to talk about without kind of offending one side or the other.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the issues. But I have a couple things to say about it. I think that type of thing is risky in a sense, because I think identity politics is inevitably a downward spiral. I think intentionally segregating people in that type of way is something that we're trying to move away from, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's where people are coming from when they react to things like that. Because imagine if it went the other way and it was like, hey, we're going to have this such and such event. It's just for white people.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's not a conversation anybody wants to have. And I think actually a university did that this year at some point. They had like a BIPOC meeting group, and then they had a non-BIPOC or white meeting group, and they just got absolutely torn apart for having this like white affinity group.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to acknowledge with it. And
yeah, but
the other thing is like,
can I speak to that? I want to say one thing to that real quick. But there's a huge fundamental difference here, and that is, as a white person in this society, the entire society is reflective of me. Like, I am the group in quote unquote control. Like, I am the person, all the movies look like me, all the TV shows look like me, all like the advertisements, all the politicians are white, you know, not all of them, but you know what I mean? Like, the vast majority of all these people are white. And so white people are in the position of, oh God, I'm blanking on the word right now, but like, we are the people in power, right? We are the privileged people in this society, at least specifically in the United States of America. And as such, like, we don't have the same need for an affinity group. Like, we don't have the same need for a support group of getting together with people who are not like us to talk about their experience of being in a society of people that don't look like them, you know? And does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I just think that there's a lot of danger there.
Yeah.
And I also don't agree that I would say, I mean, obviously, definitely, like, it is a society that is majority white, but it's not everything in the society is for you, made you reflective of you. Like, America is a very diverse place, reflecting, I would say, like proportionate to how many Black people, let's say, proportionate to how many Black people there actually are in America. Like, Black culture is a huge part of American culture. Like, it's huge. I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to be Black for a long time. Like, those were the people I looked up to. It was like, they were not like, in my eyes at least, they were not like outcast from society, and they were my heroes, you know? Yeah. So I think, like, to say it in that much of I just don't think it's as extreme as that. I think there's been a lot of rhetoric about it this year. And I agree that there's a lot to be talked about, and a lot of people do feel outcast, and they do feel like they're not represented, and they do feel uncomfortable coming into situations where the majority of people don't look like them.
Yeah. And
that's a very tricky thing to address, because what it results in is things like what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, this space is for these people who look like this, and this space is for these people who look like this. And I also don't think that's inherently wrong. It's like, if you're going to have a men's group, it's not because you hate women.
Right.
It's because you want to have a men's group.
Yeah. Well, and specifically in terms of race, and here we are, two white dudes talking about this, just acknowledging that. But like, it is super important. Like, if you're trying to do actual healing around racial wounds, racial trauma, like ethnic wounding, ethnic trauma, it's not a good idea, generally speaking, for Black people and white people to be in the same room doing healing, doing certain specific kinds of healing work around their racial trauma and their ethnic trauma, because there's so much charge there. And a lot of white people, like, a lot of the work that we have to do is to deprogram our stories and deprogram our beliefs around people who don't look like us. And it's not necessarily helpful to be doing that in the presence of people who have not had the lived experience of us. So I'm thinking about one workshop that I went to specifically. It was around men's oppression and racial oppression and healing that. And in this workshop, which is beautifully, beautifully facilitated, there was, at one point, we separated into two different groups. We separated into, all the white men went into this one room, and all of the people of the global majority, who is everybody who's not white, went into a different room. And this is in the United States, depending on where you're listening. And then all of us white people, like, we talked about, what is it like, you know, as a white person, like, what are your beliefs of Black people? What are your beliefs of Hispanic people? Like, how can we talk about this and recognize and acknowledge the programming and the beliefs that we have around this stuff, so we can get them out of our system, and then we can reintegrate, you know, in the workshop setting with this other group of people. And then they had their own process that I don't even know exactly what they did. But then from that place of each talking about our own lived experiences, then we could come together and actually have a meaningful conversation that was healing and productive as a group. But not until we addressed our own individual sets of challenges, because as white people in this society, we have a very different set of challenges growing up, generally speaking, than you do if you are Black. You know what I mean? And it's super, super tricky to facilitate this, super tricky, but it was done really well. And I know that it's possible, and I hope more of this kind of work starts happening in the world, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of healing to do, especially in our country, that, you know, obviously comes back to the way that we were born and the way the world was at that time. You know, we have this kind of like deep trauma of like, you know, Black people literally being brought over here as slaves and
Totally.
and existing in this country in that way for the first time. And also the, you know, the initial trauma of the colonizers coming over and essentially committing genocide and killing off everybody else who was on the land.
Yeah.
But I also think, like, in terms of moving forward, I think let's see, how do I want to say this? It's a challenging conversation to have, and there's this whole idea like I can only see the experience from my personal experience to a certain extent, you know.
Yeah.
As you said, like, I don't know what it's like to grow up in America as a Black person, or, you know, or as a woman, or as a Chinese person, or anything. Like, I can only see it from this perspective.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, what I've seen this year from certain parts of the American public voices is this kind of like hypersensitivity and hyper racialization, essentially, where every conversation comes down to like, what identity group are you part of? What racial group are you part of? And I think that some of that is regressive. I think what we want to move towards is a society where that is not the, you know, the thing that matters. You know, the thing of the utmost importance is not skin color or gender or whatever, religious orientation.
Yeah.
And so that's that's where I want to move with it.
Totally. I mean, I don't think that there's a whole lot of people that would disagree with that, in the sense that ideally we'd be living in a world where we just like lovingly and excitedly accept everybody for who they are, you know, and celebrate that and celebrate our differences. Like, that's beautiful. I think, and I hear you. Like,
so easy.
Yeah, well, it's tricky in this current state of things, for sure. But I think it's great that it's all bubbling up and we're having these conversations. Like, we have to have these conversations in order to eventually get to that point. You know, we have to be having these tricky, challenging conversations and figuring out how to do it, because we can't just jump to, oh, skin color doesn't matter, because it really fucking does matter. You know, it really does matter right now, at least for us to begin to understand each other and to understand that we've had different experiences. And then once we reach that state of understanding, then possibly society could shift, you know, in a more open way.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I guess my sense is that what's the most important for us is to shift from identifying people by their collective identity and moving towards their individual identity. And I think a lot of people actually do that already. There's a lot of that happening around me, and I live in a very racial place in the world right now. And like, from what I've seen, like, people are peacefully coexisting and interacting with each other very well almost all the time.
Yeah.
I think one thing that is happening, especially with social media right now, is that it's like hyper inflaming these pockets of you know, intense trauma and division.
Totally.
And projecting that out onto the entire psyche of the country and of the world. And I think it's become incredibly toxic and damaging.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God, you know, Facebook is a rough place to be for a lot of people right now to have any sort of meaningful conversation. And it's just all exacerbated by the fact that, like, none of us are getting the same sort of exercise or social connection that we have been and we're used to in our life. And most people are feeling all cooped up and inside. And so they're projecting all their shit out into the world. And it's just a big shit show, you know, it's just a big shit show. And it just happens to be around a time when this conversation about race is really coming to the forefront of things, you know. And you know, I've been thinking about, I have this comic book, or not comic book, but like, you know, a meme image in my head of, like, it's comparing 3 different scenes, and like one of them is CNN, we're all dying because of coronavirus, you know, Fox News, the liberals are going to kill us all. And then it's like shows this other scene of just like a bunch, like group of people hanging out outdoors at a park. Like, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? And I think,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm on that channel.
yeah,
It's my favorite.
it's a good one. It's a good one for sure. And, you know, I think when people hear the word racism, a lot of people who hear the word racism will immediately think of people who are intentionally doing harmful things because they believe one race is better than the other. And I just want to say, like, racism is so much more than that. There's so many subtle things that do it. And it's even just like, when I say the word black person, what do you think of? You know, like when I say the word Mexican, what images pop into your head? What images pop, you know, what beliefs do you have around these people? And they're not necessarily bad per se, but it's stories. And whenever we put somebody in a box based on our beliefs of who they are, based on their skin color or ethnicity, specifically as a white person, as somebody who's in the position of privilege in the society, then I think that's, you know, it's something that worth looking at.
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, I think, so you're saying like racial prejudice essentially is another piece of racism that is more ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. And I think, go ahead.
The white privilege conversation has been very interesting to watch this year also.
Yeah.
I had, so I think one thing that I think is like, I think is almost like, this gets into kind of like a Marxist tendencies for a lot of people, where it's like we don't want to take away privilege from people. We want to give privilege to as many people as possible. Privilege is good, and privilege is not given out in this country based on race, although historically it has been distributed unevenly based on race, and was distributed absolutely by law based on race, right? But these days, oh, right.
Yeah, you just broke up there for a second. I'm not sure if I missed something, but
I had some internet issue. Yeah, but so I heard an interesting quote from Jordan Peterson that was like, the purpose of society is to privilege the people of that society.
Say that again.
The purpose of society, or one of the functions of society, is to provide privilege for its citizens. So like this idea of like privilege being a bad thing that we should deny or shy away from is like, I'm not on board with that at all. I just want it to be accessible for everybody and anybody who is an inhabitant of this country and really the world.
Totally. So I don't think, I totally hear what you're saying. And I'm not on board with the idea that privilege is bad inherently. I think it's just important to acknowledge and be aware of privilege and how it shows up in the world. And I think when we're not aware of that, that's when we can say things or do things unintentionally that hurt other people.
Sure.
You know, and white people aren't bad inherently for having privilege. It's just an important thing to acknowledge. And and I
think that's part of where it goes right now, is that there's this kind of like, there's this pervasive narrative about essentially like the evils of white people. And, you know, speaking from the perspective of a white person and a white male, like the absolute worst of the worst as you can be as a straight white male in certain people's worldviews. And that's almost like pretty socially acceptable to just throw out this anger and hate towards this one group of people simply based on their skin color and identity group.
Yeah.
And to me, like it looks like more of the same. It looks like exactly the thing that we're trying to move away from.
Yeah.
I just think that I think there's caution there.
Yeah.
There's danger there, is what I mean.
Yeah. I hear that.
I'll say it again. I think identity politics is a never-ending downward spiral, and we need to be very careful with it.
Totally. But then, so then for me, my thought is like, what is identity politics? And then what's just the reality of the situation that we need to talk about and identify? And it's like, one thing that's really incredible to do is to have a conversation with somebody who's not white, specifically about white privilege, and actually let it be less of a conversation and more of you just listening to this person. Like, just listening. Don't argue, don't respond, don't debate. Just like, what is your perspective on this? And wow, like what a blessing if you do find somebody in your life who's not white, who's willing to have that conversation with you, because that's like some tricky stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And like maybe buy them lunch or something, treat them to something nice. But it's really interesting to have these, seriously, like it's
a proposition for you.
Yeah. Like, I've offered to pay people for their time, honestly, to tell me about their experience as this particular kind of person, because like it's important to me to understand this. And what they'll say, like, I'm not going to say what they all say, but what I have heard is that there are certain frustrations that we as white men, that people have about us, because, you know, we don't receive criticism or we don't receive prejudice pretty much for anything other than what we're experiencing now, which is being a white male, right? From this small group of people who has frustrations. Like, women experience sexism constantly, you know, like unwanted sexual attention from men. You know, there's all sorts of jokes about every other ethnic group, like Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, like, you know, who the list goes on and on and on. But there's not really that much about white people. And like, there's an understandable frustration, in my opinion, from people who are not white towards us, who have never really had to deal with much challenge at all if we've grown up in the Western society, because of who we are, just at a foundational level as a person. And so having those conversations has really helped me have a lot of understanding and compassion for that experience, you know, and a desire to talk about it.
That's a really cool thing to do, an interesting thing to do. I think also, I mean, one thing that strikes me about that is that, like, those things that you experienced were partially to do with your skin color, mm-hmm. and your maleness, but also had to do with where and how you grew up and what your socioeconomic status was and what school you went to and yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of the issue is attributing all those characteristics to you being a white male. Because there's a lot of white males in this country who grew up in abject poverty,
totally
dealing with violence all the time, for just sure. Like experiencing objectively pretty much all of the, you know, the negative characteristics, the negative experiences that we're, you know, kind of talking about these other racial groups experiencing.
For sure.
Which is, I think that's where part of the problem is. It's like the special kind of privilege that we're talking about when we talk about white privilege is actually, I would say it's more like white male upper middle class, you know, good neighborhood privilege.
Yeah. Classism. Yeah.
How many fields of categorization are you going to go into?
Totally.
Like, the deeper you go, the more you separate out people, and eventually you come down to the individual. Mm-hmm. A little drop of LSD to keep you going.
And it's a tincture my girlfriend made of mimosa.
Yeah, sure it is.
Yeah, I'm tripping right now. No, I mean, I agree with you. Like, you know, making negative generalizations of any group of people based on how they appear is problematic and hurtful for sure. And I think like one of the barriers to a lot of people really understanding white privilege is like what you just said. Like there's a ton of white people out there who grew up in absolute shit conditions, who never experienced anything even close to what they would think of the word privilege being, you know, violence
like,
all the
where's
time.
my privilege?
Totally.
Why don't I get it?
For sure. But even still, like there's certain, yeah, it's there. It's minute. And I wish I had this worksheet in front of me, but there's a really awesome document out there that it's like, it asks you 25 questions. It's like, have you ever experienced this? Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever experienced this? And pretty much all white people of any class will say yes to most of those things. And a lot of people who are not white will say no to a lot of those things. And if I find the list, I'll send it to you just because it's fascinating. And nowhere in there is any sort of value judgment about a white person being worse because of experiencing these things. It's just an awareness exercise, you know, just an awareness exercise. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. Like I've personally received, you know, anger and hatred because of, you know, my white maleness, especially now that I'm like becoming more known in the social media world. And like, I just accept that like that's going to happen based on the world that we live in right now. And I'm going to continue to do my work to decolonize myself so that I can have a better positive impact on the world, you know?
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think it's super important to be self-aware and to see where we're at. And obviously all this is coming up in our country to come out, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
It feels really painful and challenging, and it is, and for a lot of people it has been for a long time.
Yeah.
And I totally acknowledge that I've lived a very blessed life, and I think that some of that did have to do with my skin color.
Yeah.
But I think, as I said, I think there's a lot of pitfalls with these types of generalizations. And also like whiteness, to stay on this for just a little bit longer, is not really like, it's like this, it's really mainly this thing in America. You know, it's like in Europe, they have, you know, they're Europeans, and then there are people from all the different countries, and then there's like, you know, different racial groups within those countries, and they're not even seeing things through the same lens over there. It's like it's a special American thing that we've developed, and I do absolutely think that it has to do with how we started as a country, those sort of like the rotten foundation. And I want to bring up one more thing when it comes to that, which is that it's very important not to completely confuse or conflate that with the beautiful and noble principles that this country was founded on. And I think a lot of people are saying, you know, getting in this mindset of basically saying like, America is racist and evil no matter what, and we should just tear it down because it's never going to work.
Yeah.
And I think that's, not only is that wrong, but it's like, it's an incredibly dangerous, and I know it's a historically inaccurate perspective, and one that just doesn't really look deeply at the actual issues that we face. So another thing about that is, I think that one of the things that's happening right now is we have this seemingly ever-growing wealth gap, which is getting like pretty obscene and pretty scary, and it's been exacerbated by coronavirus. And I think a lot of people are essentially connecting that with racism, like thinking that it's caused by racism. And I think that is a very dangerous and factually incorrect idea. Not that they're like, and because
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I want to say like this is a huge rabbit hole, and I'm at the end of my my time that I had planned for this. 'Cause I have something else I have to go to shortly, and it's like such a fascinating conversation. And I'm like, oh, I want to keep talking about this, and I don't have the time to keep talking about it right now. But there's one point that I wanted to just throw in real quick before we end is I was communicating with this person from India recently, this week actually, who was saying how much he doesn't like the term person of color, because like he doesn't feel like he identifies with that, and he feels like it's putting him in some group that he doesn't want to be in also. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Like, how is this really an American, a United Statesian thing to do? Like, oh, people of color, like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe, I don't know. So I just wanted to add that in there. And I also want to say thank you for having this conversation and being open to talking about race and this stuff and the trickiness of it all. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to connect about it and be okay with not saying everything perfectly, but like having good intentions and trying to do the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate talking with you about a lot, and equal rights for all.
Yeah. Maybe possibly to be continued in the next thing.
Yeah, I think we are moving somewhere. I think, as I said, I think it's coming up to come out, or at least to like start or continue the healing process. And I hope that we can continue looking at it through that lens and being kind to each other through it all. But yeah, I really appreciate all of the stuff you've talked about. It's been really fun to hear what your perspective is, and I think we could easily do a round 2 or a round 3. So
for sure,
hopefully we can make that happen soon.
Yeah, cool, man. Thank you so much. It's awesome to see you too, and thank you everybody for tuning in. It's been sweet to share this space with you.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Yeah, I'm all like, should we end it with all that stuff? What else?
Well, I gotta go. So, man, I don't know if you want to put in a closing thing or something like that.
I'll just keep ranting about racism for another 20 minutes.
All right.
No, it's been real. So good to see you.
Same.
See you again soon. I love you so much.
Love you too, man. Have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you.
Peace, brother.
Peace.